Well, good morning, all. Sorry for not being with you in person. I was looking forward, but then logistics didn't work, and also, probably saved a bit of CO2 emissions. But I was asked to talk about digitization, but I wanted to link it to some of the other projects we heard about earlier today, and over the course of the whole discussion. And so the title I gave has been Utopia or Oblivion. And the reason I took this title, as you all know, this comes from a book by Bucky Fuller. Buckminster Fuller is a great designer, architect, inventor in the past century. He was also for a little bit a professor at our institute at MIT. And the reason I picked then his name, Utopia or Oblivion, is that I believe that design, and we're talking also about the new European Bauhaus and all of that. Design, I think it's a utopia or oblivion moment. So if you keep on thinking about design as beautifying existing objects, then it is going to be oblivion. And here you see the beautiful chair collection by Vitra, love chairs. But on this planet, on our planet, we got 70 billion chairs. And so certainly we don't need more chairs or differently designed chairs in order to tackle the big challenges we face. But if design actually can tackle those challenges in other ways, first and foremost, climate change, a lot of the things we heard about before today and in the context of our gathering, then it can be utopia. And it requires a big change. It requires a change in focus. It requires a change in methodology. Thinking about design is bringing together different disciplines in order to tackle complex problems. Now, the problems we focus on in particular in this space are the urban problems. Why? Well, that's easily said. We're passionate about cities, but also if you just retain four numbers about cities, 255, 75, and 80, cities are only 2% of the surface of the planet, 55% of the population, 75% of energy consumption, 80% of CO2 emissions. So if we can do something to make our cities a bit more sustainable, that can be a big deal globally. And what can we do today? Well, we can use leverage many new technologies, and also what is happening at the convergence of digital and physical. You could say the internet is becoming Internet of Things, and as such, is transforming the way we can understand the city through data, huge amount of big data, huge amounts of big data, how we can use the data for better design, and how ultimately better designs can lead to new lifestyles in cities. So that's what we're passionate. Now, I wanted to be a bit faster. I remove a few slides, but I want to show you. So one way to look at this is through digital, as we are saying, and how the city becomes like a living organism. What you see here is a visualization of Lisbon using billions of data points collected from the taxi network. This was done by Pedro Cruz, who was a researcher in our lab at MIT. And if you look at this, digital allows us to see a city like a living organism, and then we analyze the data again, and we can design in a better way. But today, then I decided to focus on how digital mixes with physical elements, and tell you briefly about the project, which is called the Helsinki Hot Cup. This is a project that requires infrastructure, deals also with natural elements and forests, and also would not be possible without data and artificial intelligence. So let me tell you briefly about what it is. It's a competition launched by the city of Helsinki around 2 years ago. It was framed in a way that was quite unusual for cities. Usually cities follow best practices, and I've argued several times best practices basically lock what we've done in the past into the future. So they're not the best way to innovate and to speed up innovation. Here, the approach was like a moonshot. What in the US is similar to the X Prize Foundation. So somehow, getting an ambitious goal and trying to get ideas from anybody in order to solve it. And in this case, the goal was how to decarbonize district heating in the city. Here you see the timeline. And the problem with district heating in Helsinki is that on the one hand, it is good because it uses hot water from power plants. That's usually a good recipe because you produce power and at the same time you use hot water for heating the city. But at the same time, the power plants are run on coal, and the city has decided to decommission them by the end of the decade. And so the question, the challenge for this kind of moonshot was what could be technologies to help decarbonize district heating in Helsinki? As you know, Helsinki also been at at a very at the northern latitude, also is a city where heating is one of the primary needs for energy consumption. So this started a couple of years ago. It attracted at the beginning over 250 submissions, including submissions from major companies and agencies, including, I remember there was the Chinese Atomic Energy Agency who was on the first call, and so, but 150 from all over the world, 10 finalists, and then the winners that were announced around a year ago. And our office led one of the teams who has been one of the winners, and now we're working with the city to implement the solution. So first of all, as I was saying before, I think we require more interdisciplinarity. So the team, as you see here, had many engineers. We coordinated from our New York office, but many engineers, Bramble, Transolar, SBP, also some large multinational like Danfoss or Schneider Electric, OP, dealing with finances, or Squintopera, helping in the way all of this can be communicated and made understandable for a broader public. So here's a short video. Actually, I probably need to share the screen again to share audio as well, but it's a short video about the project. And yeah, here it is. We're excited to present to you the Hot Heart, an innovative solution to decarbonize Helsinki. Here is how we'll do it. So very briefly, as you saw there, so what is the key problem to decarbonize today? Well, on the one hand, something good news. To the left, you see how prices of renewable production are going down. In this case, in particular, is wind power prices over time. And today, around the planet, you can actually produce a megawatt hour in a sustainable way, in the cheapest possible way, and as a cheaper source of energy, something between $10 to $30 or euros per megawatt hour. But the big problem, as we all know, is intermittency. So what you see to the right is that actually sometimes you produce too much, sometimes you produce too little, and so that's a big issue. Now you might say, of course, why don't we use batteries? Well, the reason is that cost is still very high, is not going down very fast. Batteries requires a lot of raw materials. And if you see here, I told you 1 megawatt hour you can produce today between $10 and $30 on the planet. You know, there could be solar, it can be wind. But to store those $10 or $20, we require today over $200,000, which is what you see here to the left. So our idea was, in this case, because we need ultimately to turn electricity into heat, why don't we store heat? It turns out that if you store heat, if you do something that you could call like a thermal battery, Well, the cost per megawatt hour is not anymore 200,000, it's more like $200, 200 euros, $200. And you see the two options, the floating and the better one. And in order to do this, again, this would not have been possible a few decades ago. To do this, you really need to have a lot of control. You need to have a smart grid. You need to use AI in this case to put together all the pieces. The pieces are different sources of heat and energy to the left, the storage, the battery that needs to be managed in the same way as you got a BMS for traditional battery, you need to BMS for thermal batteries, and then how this is distributed in the city. And you see, when you do this, you can also allow for many different mixes, as you see at the bottom, many different mixes in terms of energy mixes in order to power the system. Because we don't know exactly what the mix will be. Clearly, wind is the best source of energy in Finland, in the Nordic countries. But the mix can change, might change because of new technologies, and you want to be compatible with different futures. And as I was saying, additional benefits. One is that you equalize the whole power grid, as it was mentioned in the video, but at the same time also using the top of the floating islands for something else. And we think that is important because it's a way to engage people, to teach people about the infrastructure, to make it visible, legible, and ultimately the only way we can tackle such problems is if we all take part in it. And so involving people, we thought was very important. And here the idea to create these biodomes, this kind of floating forest, again, is a way to allow people to experience what, both the infrastructure and the consequences of it. I will be a bit quick because of the lack of time about, where to put it. There was a lot of work to decide where to place it in next to Helsinki. You see here the sketches, you saw them before. This is from the outside with the biodomes floating over the ocean. Here you see what can happen inside. Again, is a way to create an ecosystem, a biodome with trees. We decided to take the 4 tropical forests from the planet, Central America, South America, Africa, and Asia, and to bring samples of them, to replicate samples of them in Helsinki. And again, I will not get into the structural engineering. This works pretty much like a bicycle wheel, which is a very efficient structure, has been used many times by Jörg Schleich, one of the greatest engineers in the 20th century. But then in a nutshell, so, again, we're working with the city to build it now, to build the first pond, the first pool, the first floating island, and then to scale up. But it becomes a new way to do district heating, can be completed by the end of the decade, storing all of the heat needed by the city in 1 year, which is around 6,000 gigawatt hour. The exciting thing is that we didn't know at the beginning, but it turns out that when you do all of this, you pay back the investment and your cost per megawatt hour is 10% less than today, which makes it interesting. It means, initially we thought, well, people in Helsinki might need to pay more in order to decarbonize. But in this case, it turns out when this is completed, it pays itself back. And you still have energy at 10% less than today, with the 2 bonuses we mentioned, load balancing and the floating tropical forest we saw before. Again, this is not a universal solution. I think every city will have to decarbonize, but certainly many cities are next to big bodies of water for different reasons. Historically, since cities emerge, you've got rivers, lakes, the ocean, and especially where you need a lot of heating, like, northern latitudes, or also when you need a lot of cooling, because you can use the same thing in reverse to store cold water. Solutions such as this one could be an easy way to turn the intermittency of the grid, when powered by renewable, into using very cheap, as I said, thermal batteries, and turn the intermittency into a constant heating or cooling load. So, sorry, I've been running through this because I was told to shorten the presentation, but I hope this was clear. I'll stop it here and look forward to the conversation. For me, the point here is, digital is changing the way we understand cities, but the most interesting thing is that when digital data, artificial intelligence merge with infrastructure, with the city itself, with the urban fabric, and that's when, we can really change the paradigm in terms of thinking about where we live. Thank you.